In the heart of Congress, Jasmine Crockett locks eyes with Barron Trump, armed with explosive confessions that expose his true parentage. The family's golden facade crumbles and the nation watches as history is rewritten live. How far can a dynasty fall when its greatest secret is revealed? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The congressional hearing room was a pressure cooker, every seat jammed with lawmakers, reporters, and flashing cameras. The silence was razor sharp, broken only by the hum of live broadcast equipment feeding millions of homes. It didn't feel like politics. It felt like a trial where a nation sat in judgment. Jasmine Crockett entered with a battered briefcase clutched tight, her expression, hard eyes blazing with purpose. She wasn't just another congresswoman tonight. She was the executioner of secrets. Across from her, Barron Trump leaned back in the witness chair, tall and composed, the picture of inherited confidence. He smirked faintly, a prince on display, daring the world to doubt his bloodline. The cameras zoomed in merciless. A narrator's voice dropped like a hammer. Today, America will know, is Barron Trump truly Melania's son, or has the country been deceived all along? Jasmine Crockett rose slowly, her fingers brushing the worn briefcase at her side. She looked directly at the chairman and said, steady but sharp, "Mr. Chairman, I am requesting permission to play a piece of declassified audio evidence." The room erupted in murmurs. Barron Trump shot forward in his chair, eyes blazing. His voice cut through the noise. "This is fabricated. This is illegal. It cannot be allowed." The clash of voices rattled the air like the crack of thunder. The chairman, stone-faced, banged his gavel. "Order. This committee will hear the evidence. Permission granted." Jasmine nodded, lifted a small player from her case and pressed a button. For a second, nothing but static filled the chamber, the kind of low, menacing hiss that already made people lean closer. Then the voice came, unmistakable, gravelly and blunt. It was Donald Trump. The words were sharp, undeniable. "Melania cannot have children. The doctors said there is no hope." A collective gasp spread like wildfire. Reporters froze with pens, mid-air cameras zoomed in so close that every bead of sweat on Barron's face glistened under the lights. And then, before anyone could breathe again, the voice continued. "We must keep this a secret. No one can ever know." The sound of his confession poured into the chamber like poison, and suddenly the silence was heavier than steel. The weight of those words pressed down on everyone present, choking the air. Jasmine's voice cut through like a blade. "This is a recording from 2005, captured during a federal financial investigation, sealed under court order for over a decade." The explanation only made the atmosphere more suffocating. Lawmakers shifted in their seats, some covering their mouths, while reporters hammered their keyboards as if racing against history itself. The revelation was no longer rumor, it was evidence played out for a nation to hear. Barron slammed his palm against the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "That's illegal surveillance," he shouted, his face red, his composure cracking. He tried to drown out the tape's echo with sheer volume, but his voice shook, betraying the panic crawling underneath. Jasmine did not flinch. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on him, and her words came measured, merciless. "Truth is never illegal." He admitted it himself. "Melania was infertile, Barron, and that is why we are here today." The chamber shook under the weight of that sentence. Reporters whispered frantically, flashes strobed across the walls, and even seasoned lawmakers looked paralyzed, caught between disbelief and recognition. It wasn't just an attack, it was a detonation. The evidence had been dropped like a bomb in the middle of Congress. Gasps, shouts, and the crackle of cameras filled the air, but none of it could wash away the sound of that voice from the tape. And then, in one chilling instant, the entire room realized nothing would ever be the same after this moment. The uproar from the tape had barely settled when Barron slammed both hands on the table and leaned toward the microphone. His voice was sharp, cutting through the chamber. "You are attacking my family's privacy. You are dragging my mother into something disgraceful, and it is beneath this committee." He jabbed a finger at Jasmine, his face tight with fury. "This isn't about truth. It's about smearing the Trumps." The words carried across the room like gunfire, feeding the tension already boiling over. He reached into a folder and yanked out glossy photographs. Holding them high so cameras could catch every detail, Barron barked, "Look at these. The world has seen them. My mother has stood beside me at school. Events walked me through crowds, held my hand at holidays. You've all witnessed it. He slammed the pictures onto the table with a snap. Here, family photos at Mar-a-Lago. Christmas trees, birthdays, quiet evenings. That is a mother's love. That is proof you cannot erase. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the chamber as the images appeared on monitors for all to see. Jasmine did not flinch. She leaned forward, her voice calm but merciless. Photographs don't prove biology. Medical records leaked years ago show Melania underwent multiple surgeries and late infertility treatments. Science does not lie, Mr. Trump. Barron shot to his feet, his face burning. You insult my mother, he shouted, voice shaking with rage. Two Republican lawmakers jumped up beside him, yelling across the aisle. This is a witch hunt. The hearing room cracked open into chaos, shouts, camera. Flashes, a storm of voices colliding in the air. Yet at the eye of the storm, Jasmine's tone never wavered. I am not attacking a woman. I am exposing a truth that was buried to protect power. Her words landed like steel, splitting the chamber in two, as factions formed the tension, winding tighter with every passing second. The shouting storm had barely faded when Jasmine lifted her hand again, calm and deliberate. Her voice carried above the restless crowd. Mr. Chairman, I request permission to play the second recording. A hush fell instantly, the kind that feels like the air itself has been sucked out of the room. The chairman gave a sharp nod. Jasmine pressed the device, and once again the static crackled, building suspense like a fuse about to blow. The chamber held its breath. Then clear as day came the clipped voice of Trump's attorney, who will be listed as the mother on the birth certificate. The question hung in the air like a blade. A heartbeat later, Donald Trump's own voice cut in cold, unyielding, every syllable like ice. Melania. That is the only way to protect the image. The words detonated through the chamber. Lawmakers jolted in their seats. Reporters screamed questions, their voices overlapping in chaos. Cameras whirred lenses snapping tight onto Barron's face as he stiffened in shock. Flashes strobed like lightning, freezing the moment into history. Jasmine rose slowly, her gaze locked on the giant monitor where subtitles glowed. She began to read them aloud, her voice sharp, deliberate, each word heavy as stone. Melania. That is the only way. To protect. The image. The repetition carved into the silence, driving the truth deeper with every pause. The chamber erupted again, but this time the noise felt like a wave breaking against a cliff. It could not drown the power of those words. Barron's lips moved, but sound failed him. At last he managed a broken stammer voice, thin and unsteady. That's out of context. His face paled as the camera zoomed tighter, catching every tremor. He tried to smile, but it cracked halfway, leaving only panic. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for his collapse. The air was suffocating, a weight pressing on every chest. Jasmine's reply was merciless, slicing through his defense. There is no context that saves this. He admitted it himself. Melania's name was chosen to protect the image, not because she gave birth. Her tone carried the force of a gavel. The words struck like a verdict impossible to escape. Murmurs rippled into groans, and one by one lawmakers bowed their heads, their hands covering their faces, as if to shield themselves from the truth burning on the screens. The tension was unbearable now. Reporters shouted, pens clattered, and the air crackled with disbelief. A senior senator dropped his glasses onto the desk, unable to look up. Another slumped back in his chair, shaking his head slowly. It wasn't just scandal anymore. It was betrayal carved into tape. The chamber was suffused with the dread of history snapping open. This was the second explosion, bigger than the first, and the entire room knew it. After the second tape detonated, the room still trembled. Barron leaned into the mic, grabbing the edge of the table, as if it could anchor him. My family has carried the weight of an American legacy, he said, voice straining for steel. You can attack me, but you cannot erase what the Trump name has built. He rattled off towers, deals, elections, a dynasty minted in gold leaf, his father's victories, skyscrapers the family crest pressed into memory. I will not let you turn decades of sacrifice into scandal, he added, trying to wrap himself in the banner of honor. Jasmine stood before he could gather breath. Her tone cut clean. Honor cannot be built on lies. A ripple shot through the benches. Several lawmakers raised their hands at once, pleading for a recess in urgent, shaky voices. The chairman hesitated for a long, visible beat, but the noise outside surged like surf against the doors, and the chant rose hard and clear. "Let her speak." Barron flinched at the words, glancing back toward the gallery as if the crowd could swallow him. The cameras drank in every shift of his eyes, each blink turning into another headline. Now sweating through his collar, he whispered to himself a broken metronome. "Fake, fake, fake." His fingers tapped the table, then slipped, then clawed back, leaving smears on the polished wood. Jasmine did nothing. She let the silence build like pressure in a sealed tank, counting unseen beats. The room leaned forward, trapped inside the pause she controlled. At last, the gavel cracked once, and the chairman's voice rang out over the uproar. "This evidence must be entered into the congressional record." The words settled like a seal on hot wax. Final, official, public, impossible to peel away for anyone watching live. The chamber was still reeling when Jasmine slid another envelope across the table, thicker than the rest, sealed in red wax with the words "Confidential." "White House Archives" stamped in bold. She placed it gently before the microphone, her eyes fixed on Barron. The room went silent again, reporters frozen in anticipation. Her voice was steady, deliberate, almost surgical. "This is not my testimony," she said. "This is her voice, the voice of Melania Trump." Gas rippled through the benches. Barron stiffened instantly, his shoulders locking as if bracing for impact. The chairman gave a reluctant nod and Jasmine pressed play. A low hiss filled the air, static, scratching like nails on glass. And then it came clear, unmistakable, heavy with fatigue. Melania's voice, fragile but unflinching. "Barron, he is not my son. I agreed to keep the secret to protect Donald's image. I had no choice." The words struck like a thunderclap. The chamber convulsed with sound, reporters shouting, cameras snapping, lawmakers jolting upright as if electrocuted. Some covered their mouths, others dropped their pens onto polished wood. The sound system reverberated as the recording looped, each syllable echoing into every corner. "Not my son. Keep this secret. Protect Donald's image." It was betrayal carved into sound, undeniable, devastating. Jasmine rose, her face unreadable, and pointed to the giant monitor where the subtitles glowed in stark white. She began to read them aloud, slow, deliberate, each word like a gavel striking. "He is not my son. I agreed to keep the secret." The words were no longer just Melania's, they were etched into the record of Congress, into the eyes and ears of millions watching live. Every pause made the silence heavier, more suffocating, until it felt as though the entire nation was holding its breath. Barron's face drained of color. His lips moved, but no words came. He blinked rapidly, chest-heaving, sweat dripping down his temple under the relentless lights. His hands shook as he gripped the edge of the table knuckles, whitening, whispering soundlessly to himself. The camera zoomed closer, merciless, magnifying his collapse for the world to see. "That's... no. No." But the microphones caught nothing coherent. Reporters surged forward, their voices a wave breaking against the committee. "Is this authentic? And when was it recorded? Does Barron deny his own mother's words?" The clamor was deafening, a hurricane of noise. And still Jasmine did not move, letting the tape and the silence do all the damage. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold and cutting. She admitted it herself. There is nothing left to argue. The weight of it settled over the chamber like a shroud. Lawmakers sagged in their seats, one senator dropping his glasses, another bowing his head into his hands. The truth had arrived, not in speculation, not in rumor, but in Melania's own voice. It was no longer Jasmine's accusation. It was confession. The room froze, every second dragging like eternity, and for the first time, Barron Trump had no shield left. The chamber still shook with the echo of Melania's words when Barron slumped into his chair. His back curved forward, shoulders collapsing inward, the defiance drained from him in an instant. The boy who had walked in like a prince now looked hollow, his eyes darting desperately but finding no anchor. His hands trembled on the polished wood as flashes from the cameras burst like lightning, each one capturing his fall. The room smelled of sweat, paper, and fear. The heir of a dynasty had shrunk into silence. Across from him, Jasmine remained upright, her posture unbroken. She didn't flinch under the storm of cameras, didn't blink beneath the glare of the lights. Her eyes were locked forward, steady, unwavering, as if she carried not just her own strength, but the weight of every truth ever buried. In that stillness, she was the iron spine of the chamber, the contrast to Barron's collapse. The audience watching at home could see it clearly, power shifting, one figure rising as another crumbled. Outside the chamber, the world ignited. News networks cut into regular programming, lower thirds screaming, "Breaking Melania admits Barron." Not her son. In living rooms across America, millions of older viewers leaned closer to their screens, voices overlapping in shock, anger, vindication. Call-in lines, jam talk radio flared to life. Social media went into meltdown. For decades, they had watched the Trump name dominate headlines. Now they saw its youngest heir unravel in real time. The noise outside the Capitol sounded like thunder rolling in chants and shouts carried through the marble halls. Jasmine's voice pierced the uproar. Calm, deliberate, merciless. No one is guilty for infertility, but hiding the truth to protect power, that is the real sin. Her words struck the chamber like a final gavel, heavier than anything the chairman could wield. They echoed into microphones, into televisions, into history, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The moral blade was drawn and thrust deep, and there was nothing left for Barron to parry with. The chairman finally raised his gavel, his voice rough with the gravity of the moment. This hearing is adjourned. A federal investigation will be opened immediately. The crack of the gavel reverberated like a gunshot, sealing the fate of the testimony, making it official. Staffers rushed to pack up papers. Lawmakers whispered urgently, but the decision had been made. This was no longer debate. It was evidence bound into law. Barron rose slowly, each movement heavy, as if gravity had doubled around him. He turned his face from the cameras, shielding himself with his hand, avoiding the lenses that clawed for every angle of his defeat. Security flanked him as he shuffled toward the exit, but nothing could protect him from the judgment already spreading across the country. His departure was not triumph, it was exile. By the time he stepped out of the chamber, he was no longer the image of a future leader, but the embodiment of a crumbling legacy, a living symbol of a dynasty built on deception. And as the doors closed behind him, the victory was clear. In the eyes of the public, Jasmine Crockett had claimed the moment unbroken, untouchable, the woman who had turned power's greatest lie into dust. The echoes of the gavel still vibrated in the chamber when the first wave of demands came crashing in. On the Democratic side of the aisle, lawmakers rose to their feet, their voices cutting like blades across the hushed room. "We demand a full investigation into the Trump Organization," shouted Representative Klein, slamming his hand on the desk. Others joined him, a chorus of outrage and resolve. "This is not merely scandal," one senator barked. "This is fraud at the highest level. The American people were deceived, and now we must uncover the machinery behind the lie." Their words struck hard, and for the first time in hours, even Republicans could not drown them out. Fox News cut to a breaking banner so quickly that anchors stumbled over their scripts. CNN flashed red with urgency. Breaking Melania Trump's secret recording, while MSNBC looped the clip of Jasmine Crockett reading Melania's confession, each word underscored by captions that screamed betrayal. Across the country, screens lit up with the same images: Barron's pale, sweating face, Jasmine's unflinching stare, the damning words, "He is not my son." Within minutes, every major outlet had surrendered their programming to the hurricane. But inside the Republican Party, the response cracked into two jagged halves. A faction of loyalists rushed to Barron's defense. On Fox, surrogates argued furiously. "This is an ambush," thundered one commentator. "A young man's life is being destroyed by political vultures. This isn't evidence, it's entrapment." They demanded sympathy, begged for restraint, called it a witch hunt. Yet others in the party remained stone silent, avoiding microphones, ducking cameras, walking briskly past reporters who shouted questions. Their silence was more telling than any defense. The machine that had carried the Trump name for decades was grinding, stuttering, choking on its own contradictions. The Democrats wasted no time. Within hours, they released the wiretap recording in full, The unedited version, every syllable crisp and unmistakable. The clip hit YouTube and TikTok at once, a 20-second bomb that spread across the internet like wildfire. 50 million views in a single day. 50 million Americans hearing Melania's voice repeat again and again, "He is not my son. I agreed to keep this secret." Hashtags erupted. Trump, "Lie not my son." Crockett, "Truth." The algorithm fed it relentlessly, shoving it into timelines, auto-playing it before news clips, weaving it into memes and remixes that reached every corner of the digital sphere. For older Americans, though, the reaction was heavier, slower, and more devastating. On call-in radio shows, voices cracked with disbelief. "I have lived through Watergate, through Clinton, through everything one man said, but I never thought I'd see a first lady admit something like this." Another caller, a woman in her 70s, wept openly. "This is the biggest family shock in White House history," she sobbed. "It makes me sick to my stomach." Outside Melania's Manhattan residence, cameras swarmed like hornets. Paparazzi shoved microphones through barricades, reporters screamed her name, but the former First Lady did not appear. Blinds stayed drawn, curtains pulled tight. Each time her motorcade moved, blacked-out SUVs shielded her from every angle. To every question, the same answer: silence. The silence itself became news. Melania refuses to face America, one Chiron read. Silent or complicit, demanded another. And then the archives came clawing back to life. Old issues of Vanity Fair resurfaced articles that had hinted years ago at Melania's medical struggles. One story described a complicated surgery she underwent in 2018, noting whispers of infertility and delicate treatments. At the time, it had been dismissed as gossip, quickly buried under flashier headlines. Now it resurfaced like evidence from a crime scene, reinterpreted with ruthless clarity. Commentators read passages aloud on air, tying them directly to the confession. This was not speculation anymore, an MSNBC host said gravely. The seeds of truth were always there. We just refused to see them. The public fractured along fault lines that widened by the hour. One camp, deeply sympathetic, saw Melania as a prisoner of power. "She's a victim," said one talk show guest. "She was forced to play a role, trapped by a marriage, silenced by a machine bigger than her." Tears welled in the eyes of women on daytime panels who spoke of control, of secrecy, of sacrifice. "How many women out there have been told to stay quiet to protect a man's image?" a host demanded, her voice breaking. Melania's story is every woman's nightmare. But the other camp was merciless. They spat fire into microphones, pounded tables on late-night panels. "This was deceit for profit," snarled one conservative defector. "They used a child as a prop to sell the illusion of a perfect family, all to prop up a political brand." This wasn't protection, it was manipulation of the American people. On social media, the word fraud blazed in headlines, gifs and banners, the family brand scorched with it. The divide struck hardest among older voters. Night after night, talk shows filled with callers aged 50 and above. They shared stories of infertility, of miscarriages, of painful medical battles, once kept private in shame. But instead of diluting the scandal, it sharpened it. Their confessions built a wave of empathy for Melania, but an even sharper blade against Barron. "I don't blame her," one man said on live radio, his voice quivering. "But I cannot respect a boy who sits on a lie that big and still claims power." The audience applauded, clapping like hammers against wood. And Barron himself, his image collapsed overnight. The photographs of him storming out of the chamber, hiding his face from cameras, replayed on loop. Editorial cartoons painted him as a puppet strings, tugged by shadows of his father. Memes labeled him the false heir. His every attempt at dignity was shredded by the revelation of the truth, and the truth's echo carried louder than anything he could say. Overnight, his name became less a brand and more a cautionary tale. Within days, whispers grew into pronouncements. Barron Trump's political career was over before it began. Donors backed away quietly. Invitations vanished. Even loyalists stopped returning calls. His face no longer appeared on posters of ambition, but on headlines about collapse. One Republican strategist said it bluntly on background: "He's radioactive, untouchable." No one wants to carry that weight into 2028. It was the end of a trajectory that had been carefully staged for years. The youngest Trump groomed for inheritance, spoken of in whispers, as the dynasty's last card was now shattered by his mother's own words. And Jasmine Crockett, her name roared across the nation. For millions of Americans, she wasn't just the lawmaker who asked questions. She was the woman who pulled truth into the light, who forced history to face itself. The image was seared into memory, Jasmine standing tall, Barron crumbling, Melania's voice confessing. It was the trifecta that no spin doctor could erase. For a nation addicted to spectacle, it was more than drama. It was revelation. And for a dynasty built on image, it was death by truth. The echoes of the gavel still lingered in the air, but the true weight of the day had already been sealed. From the first tape that revealed Donald Trump admitting Melania could not bear a child to the second recording, where he coldly declared her name would be placed on the birth certificate to protect the image, to Melania's own voice confessing. Barron was not her son, the chain of truth was ironclad. No spin, no denial, no protest could sever it. Each revelation had built on the last layer upon layer, until the entire facade cracked open in front of the world. Barron's reaction told the story as clearly as any document could. The defiance at the start, the frantic display of family photographs, the stammering denials, the whispered mantra of fake, 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 all of it melted into silence once the evidence became unbearable. He collapsed under the lights, a symbol of inheritance stripped of its armor. His fall was not just political, it was human, raw, unvarnished. For millions watching, it was the moment they realized the dynasty's shield of invincibility had finally shattered. And then there was the sealed evidence, the medical documents and recordings that confirmed Melania's struggles with infertility, a detail once whispered in tabloids and dismissed as gossip. Now it was fact sharpened by her own admission. It was not the infertility itself that carried scandal, for no one is guilty of biology, but the deception wrapped around it, the deliberate use of secrecy to maintain power. That was the dagger Jasmine wielded, and it cut straight through the myth of the Trump family. The impact spread outward in rings, each one heavier than the last. For the Trump family, the consequences were immediate and brutal. The carefully curated image of a perfect American dynasty, glittering towers, golden ballrooms, photo ops with a smiling son at his mother's side was obliterated. Every magazine cover, every campaign at every televised moment that relied on the illusion of family unity was now toxic. Even loyal supporters who once defended Trump's scandals found this one harder to swallow. It wasn't about business deals, bankruptcies, or affairs. It was about blood trust and the core of identity. And when that collapses, so does the myth built on top of it. For American politics, the fallout was explosive. Calls for a federal investigation tore through Capitol Hill within hours. Democrats seized the moment, declaring this proof of systemic deceit. Republicans fractured, some defending Barron as an innocent pawn, others quietly distancing themselves, afraid of the political poison seeping into their ranks. The Justice Department received petitions to open inquiries, not only into the Trump Organization's financial dealings, but also into whether the concealment of Barron's parentage had legal implications for past filings, trusts, and even campaign narratives. In the midst of a tense election season, the scandal threatened to redraw the map entirely. Every headline screamed uncertainty: will Trump legacy survive 2028 in jeopardy? Dynasty crumbles in real time. But perhaps the deepest effect was on society itself. For decades, infertility had been a subject cloaked in silence, whispered in clinics, hidden behind closed doors. Now it was front and center in the most dramatic stage possible. A congressional hearing broadcast lived to the world. Millions of American families, especially older viewers, felt the story pierce straight into their own histories. On talk shows, callers in their 50s and 60s shared stories of failed treatments, miscarriages, quiet grief they had never spoken aloud. For them, the scandal was not just politics, it was personal. It validated their pain, it broke the taboo, and it turned private suffering into public discourse. But it also clarified the difference between personal struggle and political deceit. No one is guilty for infertility, Jasmine had said, but hiding the truth to protect power, that is the real sin. That line was replayed endlessly, becoming not just a quote, but a moral compass. Jasmine Crockett herself emerged transformed. Overnight, she was not simply a young congresswoman, but a national figure, a living embodiment of defiance against power. Commentators hailed her as the new voice of accountability, the lawmaker who refused to blink in the face of the Trump machine. Editorials compared her to historical truth-tellers who drag secrets into daylight. Protesters outside the Capitol chanted her name, and online hashtags like Crockett Truth and Stand with Jasmine trended worldwide. For many, she became proof that one person armed with facts and unshakable resolve could puncture even the largest empire of lies. Among older Americans, her impact ran even deeper. This audience, skeptical of political theater and often hardened by decades of scandal fatigue, felt the weight of her stand differently. They recognized her restraint, her refusal to gloat, the solemn way she framed the issue, not as gossip, but as morality. In their eyes, this was not another circus. It was a reckoning. It was the moment politics intersected with the oldest truths of family and integrity, and they agreed infertility was no crime, but deception for power was unforgivable. The images from the close of the hearing became iconic. Jasmine Crockett walking out of the chamber, her shoulders square, surrounded by a storm of microphones and cameras, hundreds of reporters shouting her name. The crowd outside broke into chants that rolled like thunder, truth, truth, truth. The sound echoed through the marble corridors carried by television feeds into millions of living rooms. It was more than applause. It was catharsis, the collective release of a nation that had just seen a lie collapse under the weight of evidence. And Barron Trump? He disappeared into shadows. As Jasmine stood in the blaze of lights, he slipped through a side door, his security detail ushering him quickly out of sight. Cameras caught only fragments, a hunched figure, a pale face, a hand raised to shield from the glare. The shot of him, vanishing a long shadow stretched across the floor, became the final punctuation mark. It was a portrait of retreat, of a legacy unraveling not with defiance, but with quiet defeat. Commentators labeled it the end of an illusion. The dynasty that had built itself on spectacle was undone by spectacle. The family that thrived on attention was destroyed by the very spotlight they once courted. And the young man who entered as an heir walked out as a symbol of deception. His long shadow across the corridor floor was more than a silhouette. It was the end of a myth, the closing chapter of a lie told too long. For America, the message was unforgettable. Truth might take years to claw its way to the surface, but when it arrived, it burned away the lies like fire to paper. For Jasmine Crockett, this was her victory, not just against Barron Trump, not just against a family empire, but against the culture of silence that allowed deception to reign. She left the chamber unbroken, unshaken, her name etched into the conscience of a nation that had demanded answers and at last received them. And as the chants of truth, truth, truth thundered outside, America knew the reckoning was complete. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.